Once upon a time, a patient walked into your office with the new diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, and you wanted to get his blood glucose under control. But there were too many options for therapy: dietary modification and exercise for weight loss, oral agents, non-insulin injectables, insulin injectables. What to do? Then you recalled the classic Brothers Grimm tale, Langer, Hansel, and Gretel, and it all became so clear. This sketch is going to focus on insulin analogs, or agents that increase your natural endogenous insulin secretion. The second video in this chapter will instead illustrate the agents that act at peripheral tissues to decrease resistance to insulin. We'll even go straight to the source and block glucose release and absorption. This first video, however, is all about insulin. Insulin is the storage and anabolic hormone of the body. At Sketchy, we represent insulin with a welcome inside mat, such as this one here that invites lost children into this creepy high-carb cottage. Just think of insulin as the hormone that welcomes glucose and fat inside the cell, either for storage or to facilitate cell growth and metabolic functions. Insulin comes from the pancreas. Specifically, insulin is produced by beta cells in the islets of Langerhans, where it's stored in granules waiting to be released. Enter poor little Langerhansel, abandoned in the forest by his parents. Can you blame his evil stepmom, though? I mean, those are harsh times with that famine and all. Too many mouths to feed. Langerhansel, of course, embodies the islet of Langerhans. And to remind you that insulin is produced by beta cells specifically, little Langerhansel holds out our recurring beta 2 tuba. As he sounds a distress call, hoping that some friendly, preferably non-cannibalistic passerby will come to his aid. Recall that beta 2 tuba is our recurring Sketchy symbol for the beta 2 adrenergic receptor. Turns out that there are many stimulants of insulin release, including direct sympathetic activation of beta 2 receptors on the beta cell. However, the most potent stimulator of insulin released from the beta cell is glucose. Oh, and it looks like Langerhansel's found some glucose now. But what's it doing here in the middle of the forest? He wants to take a bite, but can't shake the feeling that someone is watching him. When he does take a bite out of that mysterious forest candy, here's what happens. Glucose enters the circulation, eventually making its way to the beta cells of the pancreas. Here, hyperglycemia results in increased intracellular ATP levels. Just imagine that excessive glucose influx into the beta cell leads to an overabundance of energy. In other words, too much ATP. See that closed gate meant to keep lost forest children from wandering around in that eerie flower garden? It's the key to this whole insulin-releasing process. Special ATP-gated potassium channels close in response to increased intracellular ATP, depicted by this closed gate preventing access to that whimsical, yet creepy, banana-flavored potassium candy flower bed. Closed potassium channels means decreased potassium efflux, resulting in depolarization of the beta cell. Enter Gretel, Langerhansel's carefree younger sister, who's decided to make the most of this otherwise disturbing predicament. What? Ice cream just grows on flowers here? Don't mind if I do. Membrane depolarization of the beta cell activates voltage-gated calcium channels. Gretel here depicts the ensuing influx of calcium as she bends that calci-yum ice cream flower over the garden wall. It's this increased intracellular calcium that stimulates the beta cell to secrete insulin. When the beta cell releases the contents of its granules, another peptide enters the circulation as well, called C-peptide. It turns out that insulin first exists as a larger precursor molecule, proinsulin, when it initially enters beta cell secretory granules. Within the granule, proinsulin is cleaved by beta cell peptidases into mature insulin and a C-peptide remnant. C-peptide and insulin are then secreted from pancreatic beta cells in equimolar concentrations. Think of proinsulin then as a piece of candy still in its wrapper. It's unwrapped by the beta cell, and both insulin and its wrapper are released, just like these C-peptide candy wrappers left behind by Gretel and Langerhansel as they munch on that insulin-inducing forest candy. Keep those C-peptide candy wrappers around Langerhansel in mind as we introduce the other agents in the sketch. The only time you'll be able to measure C-peptide in the serum is when pancreatic beta cells are producing and excreting their own insulin. When you administer an insulin analog exogenously, an insulin shot for a type 1 diabetic, for example, you're bypassing the body's normal endogenous synthesis of insulin and C-peptide. And C-peptide will not be measured in the serum. After insulin is released by the beta cell, it enters the circulation and diffuses into tissues where it binds to the insulin receptor on the surface of target cells. The receptor spans the cell membrane and contains an intracellular tyrosine kinase domain. Just think of this tyrosine kinase tire swing as the membrane of this inviting insulin cottage. Binding of insulin causes a conformational change in the receptor, activating tyrosine kinase activity. This sets off a cascade of phosphorylation events, eventually leading to translocation of glucose transporters to the cell membrane. At peripheral tissues, the main glucose transporter is GLUT4, so we've incorporated the number 4 into the cottage's open door. Once GLUT4 is in the membrane, now glucose can get inside your cells. It's not just about glucose uptake, though. Activation of the insulin receptor jumpstarts a number of anabolic processes inside the cell. At hepatocytes, for example, activation of the insulin receptor leads to increased synthesis and decreased breakdown of glycogen, the storage form of glucose. This is depicted here by this liver-shaped candy jar filled to capacity with stored glycogen candies. So enticing. At skeletal muscle, insulin stimulates increased glycogen storage as well as increased protein synthesis. Just think of this delicious honey glazed ham. Not only is it packed with stored protein, it's covered in a delectable glycogen glaze. Must resist. At adipocytes, insulin stimulates the storage of triglycerides, just like these fatty triglyceride-ridden donuts stored in the fat cell here. Oh God, looks so good. Okay, I'm just gonna go over here. Check it out. What's the worst that could happen? Oh, finally, we lay eyes on the hideous old hag who has laid out these enticing treats to lure unsuspecting children into some kind of disturbing toddler bakery, no doubt. Notice the potassium banana flour in her hand as well. As she takes a bite, remember that insulin administration lowers serum potassium concentrations by driving potassium into cells. This is primarily by enhancing the activity of the sodium-potassium ATPase in skeletal muscle. You know what? I don't know why I was so quick to judge. I mean, she looks friendly. Oh, look, there's a message. Let's see here. Girls and lads, rest now, don't go. Aw, see, I told you. Why don't we stay a while? This eerie, inviting message is going to embody the numerous types of injected insulin that are available. You've got rapid-acting analogs with short duration of action, intermediate-acting preparations, and long-acting agents with a slow onset of action. Insulin regimens usually involve the use of a long-acting insulin analog to provide basal or background coverage and rapid-acting insulin analogs to meet mealtime requirements. Let me show you what I mean. First, our rapid-acting short-duration agents. The names of these insulin analogs are incorporated into girls and lads sign. Insulin glulisine, aspart, and lispro. Due to various amino acid modifications, these agents do not polymerize into hexamers like regular insulin. So after subcutaneous administration, they're absorbed more rapidly. Let this tall, jutting peak in the gingerbread house remind you of the rapid peak in insulin concentrations produced by these agents. They have an onset of about 15 minutes and peak in 45 to 75 minutes, a pattern that closely mimics the normal endogenous postprandial insulin response. Therefore, short-acting agents such as insulin glulisine, aspart, and lispro, are helpful for controlling that postprandial glucose spike.